Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at PTV WORLD. In today's show, we will be talking about two important stories. The first is with reference to what is going on in the region and how India is being the destabilizing factor that it has been for a while now. And we know, of course, that in the recent past and for a long time now, India has been involved in an arms race where it continues to build up its military, its ammunition and its weaponry as well. And we know that in the recent times as well, it wants to move towards self-sustainability, considering the Ukrainian crisis as well. But this, of course, points towards the fact whether or not we can look for regional peace and stability when such things are going on within our neighborhood. And we understand that this is something, of course, which points to an exaggerated amount and emphasis on defense and procurement of defense equipment. And we know this because there have been a lot of reports with regards to India being ranked as the third highest in terms of military spending. And we also know that in the past years, India has also had record high weapon tests, ammunition procurement, and other deals with different countries as well. And now, when we see that perhaps the engagement with Russia seem to be dwindling, there have been alternative approaches that have been undertaken by India, including models of self-sustainability as well. So we're going to be discussing India's arms race and its obsession with procuring more and more defense equipment and how that is going to play around in terms of regional peace and security and what needs to be done about it. Our second segment of the show is going to take a look at the economic situation of the country and then, of course, in the light of the talks with the IMF, whether or not we're going to be able to see the kind of change that we want to, and of course the issue of subsidies on fuel and electricity. We're also going to be taking a look at the economic measures that need to be taken by the government and the announced ban on import of luxury items by the Prime Minister, and how that is going to impact the economy in the long run and what needs to be done with regards to increasing our exports as well. So that is going to be the focus of our second segment of the show today. As always, I have been joined in the studios by Farrukh Pitafi and by Raja Faisal in the studios. And for our first segment, I have been joined online by Mr. Qamar Cheema, and we're going to be talking with him with regards to what is going on in terms of regional peace and stability. Thank you very much for joining us in the debate. I'll start with you, Mr. Cheema. When we take a look at the situation around the world and in the kind of actions that India has been taking for a while now, it's quite obvious that there has been an exaggerated amount of spending on military equipment and obtaining different deals from various countries, particularly Russia as well. Do you think that this sort of activity is unusual in the sense that it needs to be taken notice, especially because India is a nuclear armed state, and then of course it is also in a region where tensions are high, and then we also see the government that is in place within India, and we've seen some unreasonable decisions being taken by the government. And so can we really rely on India as being a responsible state? And if not, if the kind of military spending that we see from within India is something that requires the attention of the world community, what do you think needs to be done about it? Mr. Cheema, can you hear me?
Right. There seems to be
a problem. I don't think Mr. Cheema can hear us, and we're going to try and re-establish our contact with him once again. Faisal, why don't you take the same question?
Well, if you can repeat the question. Please.
Right. So, Faisal, what we were discussing is, of course,
Faisal zoned out.
He's zoned out, yes. We were discussing the military equipment and the procurement by India. And, of course, as you know, India has been in this arms race where it continuously tries and it gets more and more of its equipment from different countries, and then, of course, wants to develop it on its own as well. But we also see that even though we have reports coming out of how India is being ranked the third highest on military spending and whatnot, is this unusual enough for the world to take notice? Is this something that can be pointed towards and calls for attention from the world community?
Indeed it is, Sana, and if we look at Indian procurements, of course they have been constantly procuring from Russia, and in the current scenario as well, we know that there is a war going on, and of course Russia has invaded Ukraine. Even in that context, nobody is stopping India, and we know in recent past India bought S-400s from Russia, and though China bought it as well, at the same time India bought it, And we know when Turkey bought S-400s from Russia, they were sanctioned. Here it is, India buying S-400s and not getting sanctioned by the Americans. There are huge question marks over it. But I wanted to talk about why India keeps on procuring from Russia. There is only one reason, that they want to balance out the things. They don't want Russia to go head towards any other side, which Russia has started going towards China. Russia has started going towards, it came towards Pakistan as well. So it is mending its relations with the rest of the countries as well. India does not want that to take place. That is why India constantly spends around 15 to 20 billion dollar a year for procuring from Russia. It is to strategically stay safe from the Russian side. But in future, I am expecting that it might sort of get settled. And I think Qamar Chima is with us, and he can elaborate it further how it can take place. In future, we won't be seeing Russia, India procuring from Russia.
And I understand, Sana, you're going to go to Qamar Chima, but I had a bone to pick with you.
Okay.
I just noticed that your go-to guy after we could not connect with Chima was Faisal, the gentleman who had practically zoned out. I was hanging on to every word you were saying.
Were you? I
Yeah,
missed that.
and then I'm silently waiting for my turn. Let's go to Chima.
Well, if we revise and look back, you have been my go-to guy if the guest doesn't answer. But let's give Faisal some chance as well. But he zoned out, so better luck next time. Mr. Chima, when we look at the situation, of course, this is something important in terms of regional peace and security. But the kind of aspects with regard to Russia that Faisal was earlier pointing out, regardless of whatever the reasons may be, we still continue to see an arms race, and we still continue to see a lot of procurement by the Indian side and a lot of military spending. Does that not count for something? Is this sort of militarization or intense focus or emphasis on getting more and more defense equipment, spending more and more on military? Doesn't that point towards something that needs the attention of the world community for them to do something about it?
Well, I think, first of all, thank you very much for having me. I think the important thing to understand here is that India is spending about more than $76 billion in terms of arms, and in terms of defense budget. And for that matter, India is the third highest in terms of military spending in the world. And meanwhile, what we need to understand at this moment is that they are spending somewhere around 60% of the total capital outlay for the domestic acquisition. So India is going towards for buying military weapons from abroad. They are going towards going for the military weapons procurement domestically. This is one trend which has been observed recently. Overall, in the world, what we say is that more than $2 trillion are being spent in terms of buying equipment, spending on defense budget. So that shows that during the COVID time, the entire world was moving towards buying weapon, when at the same time we needed money for other things as well. So another trend which one can understand is that India from 2017 to 2021, India was obviously the largest arms importer of the world. But at the same time, India stopped importing these weapons, stopped acquiring weapons during this time, and they reduced the total share of the arms import by 11%. But still, even that time, India was the largest arms importer. So you can understand that how Indians are putting a lot of money. And coming to the question, which you also raised, that should the world be concerned? I think the world is not concerned about that, because they are concerned. They're happy, especially the Western countries are happy that the India has stopped buying from weapons from Russia. And for that matter, somewhere around from 69% of the total defense weapons they were buying from Russia, that has reduced to 46% in the last 7-8 years. So this shows that India is moving or increasing their choices. They are going towards Israel, they're going towards Great Britain, they're going towards America, and particularly France as well, because there are more markets which are open for them. And at the same time, they believe that this is one way to make the Western countries happy, as their commercial interests are aligned with them, because India believes that India wants more strategic partners globally. India is not interested in terms of the values-based relation which normally West talks about. India is concerned about the strategic partners, and they believe they can only do if they will spend more money on the defense.
Right. All
So
right.
as I,
When we look at any particular justification or reasoning, perhaps when we look at military spending or in terms of increasing defense equipment, there needs to be a threat that you're catering to. Farrukh, when we look at the situation in India, and of course the issue of Kashmir is also being posed, and the issues there that are being, of course, put out by the Indian government are also something that are there and perhaps are used to justify India's militarization of the occupied valley as well. But then again, when we look at the entire industry and the way that different countries are interacting with India in terms of defense equipment, then it means that everybody does want this threat to stay alive or the conflict to stay alive. So where can we actually look for in terms of a solution?
Right. I mean, you totally changed the context, but I want to actually come back to the issue of procurements that we have been debating so far. The last time we had a comprehensive debate on this, I actually pointed out how India, while it is actually using military procurements as a tool of diplomacy to influence other countries, it keeps on, getting hardware from everywhere, and it has a problem of integration because Russian platforms are best manned by Russians, not by the Indians, right? When I was actually talking about this, I think the next day, the former CDS actually qualified this point by bringing his plane down, and he died in the crash. I think at this moment no, I'm not jinxed. I'm just predicting the correct thing. Okay, but regarding what I was saying, Indian government is, let us actually give Modi credit for one thing. He is the master of misdirection. Misdirection, why? Because on one side, their economic meltdown continues. They believe in throwing money at every problem, right? So what is happening at this moment is the economic activity, the economic policies are so bad that the country has lost $50 billion in past 1 or 2 years, right? It might have a lot of money and it is throwing money at problems, but that will not continue. It is not infinite resource. On one side, they started with demonetization. Then they actually could not go for their tax, unified tax, that was mismanaged. And then we saw the horrible policy during COVID lockdowns. They locked down first and didn't think about the migrants who were out there, and they had to travel miles upon miles to get back to their homes because they were stranded. At this moment, India's economic policy is horrible. India's defense policy is not better either because they are frozen in the middle of a transition. They were trying to actually go for this theater command melding that was going on, and they wanted to create this serious post. They had it, and then they lost it.
Right.
And right now, at this moment, they are so frozen that such a big army is not sure whether it is going to continue with the old theaters or the new ones.
Yes, right, and Chima Saab is going to leave us very soon from this show because he just has a couple of minutes. Yes, Faisal, you can take that.
Yeah, Chima Saab, earlier I was highlighting that, of course, India wants to buy weapons from Russia, but there is China, and China feels that all of these weaponry that is going from Russia to India, it will be eventually used against China. So can we say that when in Beijing in January, President Xi and President Putin, both of them, they met and they increased bilateral trade from $117.6 billion to $200 billion. Can we say that somewhere down the line, Chinese had that on the table, that in future they don't want see that to happen? But same question I asked to one of the analysts from Russia, and he said that Russia always exports defense procurements to India. And to me, I think even if S-400 is a defense and not the offense, still defense itself is a sort of, sort of a fence in the modern times. Don't you think that?
Right, and Kamachima, I understand that you have to go. Actually, that is what alarmed me, and that's why I'm going to piggyback here. And I'm going to actually add another question that has perhaps nothing to do with what Faisal asked, but I want you to respond to that. What I see it as is the imperial overreach. India keeps on building up these defenses that perhaps it is losing money on. And eventually we know that the Soviet Union didn't fall because of any other factor. It did because of economy, the way they burned through the money. The question at this moment is, if this country continues to do exactly what it is doing, how long can it hold its current position?
Well, I think we have to be very realistic on so many observations. India, for a fact of a matter, they're trying to keep their strategic options open, and they believe in strategic autonomy. And for that matter, they resisted the pressure of the West to stay neutral in the Ukraine war. And despite the pressure came from the West, they remained neutral. And remember one thing. As far as if you just look at India-China relations, India-China bilateral trade is about $125 billion, where it's about $97.5 billion are imports. So I think India has decided this thing that they're going to keep their conflicts away from their businesses and economy. So for that matter, they're buying S-400, and the US Congress wants to give one-time waiver to the Indians. So I think what India has at the moment is that they have the location for what the Chinese, for what the Americans believe that we need India for Indo-Pacific. And remember, for the Quad partnership, India said that we are not going to be the military ally of the Quad. So that is why AUKUS was created, where Americans, British, and the Australians decided to have a military arm of this alliance and keeping the Japanese away from this. So India is keeping its strategic options open, even if it's Ukraine, even if it's Quad. So we need to look at it from that lens as well, and even going for the best of the bilateral trade with the Chinese, despite the fact the Chinese killed many Indian soldiers, but somehow they didn't let that come in the way of the trade. So this is a very interesting analogy to draw how things are being shared, but they have the money and they're buying weapons. So we need to keep on looking that how world is embracing them, despite the fact they are buying the weapons and using that in Kashmir, how they are killing the Kashmiri, martyring Kashmiris, and how they are making things very tricky, and how they are violating even their own democratic values. So that is why they don't believe in values. They only believe in strategic partnerships. They don't believe in democracy. India doesn't believe in freedom of media, the way we have seen Godi media in India. So it seems that things are not the way it should have been for the Indians. But even then, the world is embracing. This is, I think, what we have been talking and saying since long in Pakistan.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Kamachima, for being with us and being a part of the debate. And of course, these are all important concerns. And Faisal, I hope you're not zoned out, because I'm going to come to you. When we talk about the issue of India, the go-to guy, yes. Well, when we talk about the issue of India, and of course, the issues that were being pointed out by Mr. Chima and Athur as well, it seems that it's a no-brainer that India is not responsible. So many of its policies and so many of its actions are unreasonable and are violations, in fact, of humanitarian laws and the rest. But it doesn't seem to be a concern that is shared by the international community, particularly as a nuclear-powered state, and particularly in the region. We have other countries who have been cooperating with India, even within this region as well, which is why, of course, we need to understand at what point do we hope for such action, or think about India as a destabilizing factor, because is that being taken into account, that a nuclear armed state is being run by people who cannot be expected to act rationally?
Sana, there are a few words we always use, that is number one, double standards. Of course, there are double standards whenever it comes to India, and world has its own economic goals to achieve, and with the help of India, and that is what they are doing right now. Very important thing is that US-China trade war is going on, and in that India is portraying as a front line. If we look at the chain of the events, especially the current setup, current regime, Modi regime in India, they have been trying hard to go everywhere in their vicinity, and all of their neighbors, they wanted to create a sort of hegemony against them. They tried on the smaller ones, but when they came towards Pakistan in February 2019, they were gobsmacked and they were given a bloody nose by Pakistan, and we put a full stop to it. And then obviously Chinese back in May, June 2020, they whatever they did in Galwan, that was another example set for India that this is the red line and you should not be crossing it. And right now India is facing a two front. At the same time, Qamar Chima highlighted a very very important point, and that is of Quad. India being member state of the Quad and portraying as frontline against China, of course it has its own importance in front of the Western powers. That is why they can wave off India when it comes to Ukraine crisis, they can wave off India when it comes to S-400 crisis, they can wave off any time in coming future. And very important thing which Qamar Chima highlighted, and I endorse it, that Quad, which was being considered as a non-military alliance, though it was carrying out all of the naval exercises and all, in coming future I can predict and I can see that they might turn themselves into a military alliance against China in South China Sea and East China Sea. So this is what is going on, and that is why we are seeing the double standards.
All right, Farrukh, when we look at India's direction towards more self-reliance, perhaps, and not just in the wake of the Ukrainian conflict, but otherwise as well, the reliance on defense equipment from outside of India perhaps is something that they want to lessen. And there's also certain companies within India who have been developing defense equipment before as well. But do you think that this is something that India will be able to achieve perhaps in the short run and will overcome India's dependence or India's engagements with other countries in terms of military equipment?
Right. I think India is trying to actually emphasize on Make in India for quite some time. But I want to actually draw your attention to something very peculiar that is going on in Pakistan. And I understand that Pakistani hawks are many and varied. But there is something that might be some kind of planted thought that they have inhaled, or perhaps this is how they perceive it. There are people who actually think that Pakistan will have to choose a side, and eventually it will be China and it will not be the West. And that's why we have to actually take a very strong stance against the West, right? But there are others who are also doing hawks, but they actually keep on telling you very interesting things. For example, for first 30, 40 years, India and Pakistan used to view each other at parity. Both are obsessed about each other, and they would see each other as equal rivals. Then suddenly this thought started coming in our circles that what is the comparison between India and Pakistan? That India is a more populous country, that its economy is getting better, that it is far more influential than us, and that's why there's no parity. Now this constant indoctrination that somehow the battle lines have been drawn, and then that there is a Chinese side and then there is a Western side, and that India invariably is going to become the linchpin of Western power in projection in Asia or South Asia. That demoralizes people, right? Exactly the way it demoralized the previous thing did. That means you cannot do anything. You cannot lobby the West, you cannot lobby any other country, and you have to actually make peace with the idea that there is going to be a war between China and the US,
right,
while it might not be there. You never know what exactly is going on right now. So this whole project to me is counterproductive for Pakistan. I think we have to realize this, that India is very effective in its diplomacy. India has a bigger economy, but there are countries like Japan, and for a long time, Japan and China have seen themselves at even keel, despite the fact that China is much bigger. And then the US is much smaller when it comes to population. But even then it is more powerful or considered more powerful. So at this moment, nothing is set in stone. Ukraine war has shown you why the world order is not fixed. It keeps on changing every 5 minutes. And that's why instead of thinking that you have to actually just believe that Quad is going to become a military alliance, which I don't think it will, or for that matter, China somehow is going to be undermined through India, and India is essentially their ally, and that's why we have no room, I think, is self-defeating. And that's why all these hawks who are listening right now, they're requested to at least understand that you don't need to pick sides, because both sides are very good allies, and you don't have to convince yourself that somehow India is made because India is in the right camp and you perhaps you are left out.
Absolutely, and this is something perhaps that not only Pakistan needs to do, and the rethinking needs to be done on the international front as well, and as you mentioned, by world powers too. But of course, a lot of this is still something that is on the table and remains to be seen, but we really hope that whatever happens does happen for regional peace and security, and we understand that India has been playing a destabilizing role for that matter. We're now going to be talking about our second segment, which is with reference to the IMF and our negotiations with the IMF and our economic situation in the country, which unfortunately has also seen a downturn in the recent past. And there have been a lot of challenges that the new government have been facing with regards to dealing with the IMF as well as dealing with the issue of fuel and electricity subsidies as well. We've seen that there is a recent announcement by the Prime Minister with regards to a ban on luxury items, the import of luxury items, and this hopefully should be able to help us in the short run at least. Farrukh, when we talk about the economic situation of the country and particularly this decision of the import, I heard that, Faisal, yes, now go-to guys do change. So for our second segment, we'll take Farrukh as our go-to guy. So when we look at the situation and the announcement made by the PM, this seems to be a decision which is going to help. Can you help me understand in terms of what luxury items in general, what sectors we're looking at, and how much of a contribution that import ban is going to make on the economy?
Right. I don't have the numbers, but I can actually qualify what you asked. Right?
Okay.
I think the most important thing in this country, the crisis that we face is current account deficit. Right. We get imbalance of payment and money shortage, particularly dollar. Right, because that is used internationally. Your foreign currency reserves are very important. But what happens is, because Pakistan imports a lot of substance, various products, dollar keeps on leaving the country very quickly, and that has been happening right now. Pakistan has lost its forex cover substantially, because we are importing fuel products as well, and then you have decided to give subsidy to the common people, or at least sustain the subsidy that was wrongly, in my view, given by the previous government. Because of that, at this moment, dollar was rushing out of this country, and that's why rupee was weakening and dollar was actually strengthening. Now, when you actually impose a ban on luxury items, for example, there's a wide range of these items, from luxury cars to tissue papers, from luxury cars and various other tents and others, camping equipment, to frozen foods. That way, you ensure that all non-essential expenditure is cut, and that more dollar doesn't actually leave the country, because when you trade with other countries, you have to spend dollar, you cannot trade in rupee. That luxury is enjoyed only by China so far, a couple of other countries, perhaps Russia, because it keeps on saying that ruble has to be used, right? Pay back in rubles. But elsewhere, I think like Pakistan, we have to actually take care of this matter. But in the end, while this is a very good step, and it should ensure that in the coming days, Pakistan, the capital flight doesn't happen, I think the most important thing right now is that eventually, because you are tied into, or you have this agreement with the IMF, that you have to do away with subsidies. Eventually, you'll have to do that, because until IMF actually stamps its approval, you cannot get money from many lenders, and then the problem with your bond market, if you want to float bonds as well, the value depreciates.
Right.
So at this moment, this is a good step, but it must be the first step. We have many other steps
Right.
to take.
Absolutely.
One line.
Faisal, let me just welcome in the show our guests, and then you can contribute as well. Dr. Sajid Amin, who is the Deputy Executive Director of the SDPI. Thank you very much for joining us. We've also been joined by Mr. Mehtab Haider, who's a reporter and analyst. Thank you very much for joining us. I'll come to you, Faisal. Let me just quickly take a question from Dr. Sajid as well. When we talk about the situation and the economic measures that need to be taken, there have been certain statements that have been coming out from the finance minister as to which direction the government wants to be able to take. And they talk about how they want to be able to release the burden on the overall population and then have a sort of a targeted approach on the economic measures that they want to take. What exactly do you think this would entail? What sort of action or immediate measures can the government take currently? Will we be seeing a change in the fuel subsidies as well? Because earlier it wasn't changed, but the announcement was made that in the future anything can happen according to the international requirements. Is that something that we'll be seeing, since of course the IMF package depends on it?
And by the way, if the government doesn't decide to do away with subsidy, the value of rupee is declining.
Right.
So that margin, Dr. Saab, will that not increase? That you'll have to increase the subsidy to maintain the current prices?
Thank you, Sana. I think there was a good discussion. I mean, before me, the speaker who was speaking actually that there is a. But let me just quickly give a context. That what is the decisions context in which the government is operating, because I think the decisions need to be understood in a context. The one is that the government has really had inherited a very unprecedented economic crisis from the day one actually when it came to power. Number two, it has a very serious political challenges to face, which is actually producing sort of a very high level of uncertainty both at political fronts and economic fronts. So that is the context in which this government is making decision, number one. Number two, like the ban on luxury items, this is actually coming from this context because given we do understand that this government is finding itself very difficult to take very long-term or medium-term structural reforms. So the only option left with this government is to take some sort of destabilization measures. So one of them is actually the ban on luxury items. I think if I would like to sort of go another route instead of banning the total sort of the imports, it may be tariff or some other good measures that could have been sort of taken. But let's see that given the sort of the context in which it is operating and the urgency that is needed, this decision sort of makes sense. It was expected decision. But let's see what is the impact of this decision in terms of because this is taken to sort of kind of diffuse pressure on the rupee. I think in that front, it may not be that impactful, sort of in terms of reducing the pressure on rupee, because this rally of pressure on rupee is more sort of led by the speculative sort of the factors which are going into the market actually. I mean, if you see over the last 2-3 weeks, there is no major change in economic fundamentals actually.
Yeah.
We have a cover sort of 4 weeks, 6 weeks of imports that is consistently. But rupee is rallying downward. And this is more pressure is coming from the sort of the speculations, uncertainty, a credibility crunch in the market. So if this measure is to reduce the deficit, it may curtail to some extent, but again, we have to see, for example, let's see that the numbers that is coming is 2.5 million per month from these 50 luxury items. So let's come club it. I mean, you will end up 2.5 to 3 billion a year. But you know, the only imports of oil in the last month, outgoing month, has increased from 1.7 billion to 2.2 billion dollars. And particularly,
can you qualify this spike? Why this spike, sir?
Yes, exactly. This is what I was coming. Generally, we see if throughout history, May is an outlier because there is a harvesting season in Pakistan, and the petrol and diesel demand is the highest in the year actually throughout over the long-term data we actually see. But the last May was an outlier for two additional reasons. Because number one, we are actually incentivizing more imports when we put a price below its original level. I mean, when you are incentivizing a person to consume more petrol, more diesel, when you are subsidizing 30, 40 rupees a liter, 70 rupees a liter actually. And that passed on to higher imports in terms of volume. There was roughly 26% growth in the sort of the crude that we import from Arab crude, you can call it, from the Gulf countries. Because we incentivize to consume more and import more because of low price than the actual price, number one. Number two, I think
Absolutely.
another factor that I think contributed to the higher imports, that was the sort of the price increase also going on. And third is mainly that is when there is a sort of uncertainty that when are the prices increasing. There was some sort of, there can be possibility of holding and black marketing, because when I know a presser that right now we are not increasing the prices, but maybe we can increase in the next phase. So generally, this pushes you to hold some extent.
So basically, you are saying. So basically, what you are saying is that we are subsidizing our own economic decline, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Which
Yes,
is
Sana,
unfortunate.
I would like to go towards Mehtab Haider.
Absolutely.
Mehtab, you being obviously a senior journalist, and we have a lot to learn from you when it comes to economic.
One of the finest journalists.
One of the finest you are. I wanted to share my personal experiences, and I wanted to question you on them experiences. Number one, I wanted to say that if we travel to the Western world, of course, any bigger store you get into, Asda, Tesco, or whatever, supermarkets, they'll be having two options for you. One, a brand you want to buy, or an alternate that would be only having Asda written on it or Tesco written on it, and that would be the same product, but of course Asda and Tesco will be buying it from the local producers. The local production is taking place. The households, they turn themselves into the local producers. So they are buying it, and at the same time, of course, they have an option to go for it rather than going for a brand.
For the cheaper one.
Exactly. Yeah. But here we are in Pakistan, we don't see this kind of stuff. We don't see this kind of local production that can actually give to our markets to save the dollars, so that we don't buy anything which is coming from outside. And there are highly unnecessary things which are being bought in our markets. Last week I was visiting one of the posh markets of Islamabad. There was cat food, cat biscuits, dog food, all of these things, they were being sold, and everything was made outside of Pakistan. It shows that in Pakistan we don't have a sort of domestic production. That is why we are importing that stuff to sell it in our markets.
Right.
And of course we are losing dollars.
By the way, this very humbly, this idea that there are two options, provided which market you are going to. If you go to other markets like Metro and others, you will see that they have this option in this country also.
They do.
Not for all.
But it's also the choice that people make. It's also the choice if they're actually even going for it, because the whole idea over here is also that perhaps we don't really take as much ownership or pride in made in Pakistan that we need to. And by the way, Faisal, just want to qualify that cat food and dog food is not an unnecessary item. It may be an unnecessary import that you're saying, but it's not an unnecessary item.
Mehtab, when will achieve that capacity in which our local producers can make everything?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for using kind words. Actually, the problem is, as you know, the dollars are running away from Pakistan. And I want to put a number to put the whole debate in the proper perspective. In last 8 weeks, our foreign currency reserves held by the State Bank of Pakistan were depleted in the range of $6 billion. So it shows how much the emergency situation prevails in the country. For instance, in March, when PTI government was ousted through no confidence move, the foreign currency reserves held by the State Bank of Pakistan were ranging $16 billion. But within this period started from February to April, it depleted by $6 billion. So there was uncertainty, and it cost heavily to the economy. So when the dollars are running away, there was a need to reverse the fuel subsidy, because earlier Dr. Amin was rightly pointing out that the consumption of petrol and diesel increased at a time when the prices in the international market were soaring. So there was a need, without IMF or without IMF, we should increase petroleum prices in a staggered manner, of course, because we want to take care of the people who are really facing the freezing inflation. But gradually, there is a need to increase the prices. And other thing is when dollars are running away from Pakistan, so there is no other option but to immediately impose ban on luxury items. But one thing I want to make clear here, that we should consider each and every item which is essential and which is non-essential. I think that is need to review by the policymakers. Another thing which I want to say, for instance, you have mentioned about the manufacturing base. Actually, in Pakistan, although our exports increased by 25% compared to the last year, but the quantity didn't increase. We just give the dividends of higher prices. That's why the problem arises, because our imports, because the prices are higher in international market, our imports increased at more accelerated pace than our exports. For instance, our imports touched $65 billion in first 10 months. Compared to the exports, there was increase only 25%. So without increasing our manufacturing base, we cannot actually meet the whole demand of the export sector as well. So there is a need of an industrial policy. There is a need of reducing the cost of doing business in Pakistan.
Right.
Without
absolutely.
that, we wouldn't be able to meet.
But that actually gives me another question for Dr. Amin. Dr. Amin, I hope you're listening to this commentary also. Mehtab, we are going to come back to you just in a minute. Dr. Amin, since we are talking about what we are manufacturing, we have seen that LSM manufacturing, actually large-scale manufacturing, has gone up. And also our exports have gone up as well. But usually what we are exporting is special niche items. But most of the usable items for the local consumption, perhaps we are not producing. Are we a victim of middle income traps? Are we trapped somewhere there?
Thank you. Unfortunately, I couldn't listen very clearly to Mehtab.
Should I repeat the question, sir?
No. I got your question, actually.
Yeah.
I think we are a victim to the thought of protectionism that we have been providing to our industry over the decades. I mean, right now, in the short term, you may think of these sort of measures like bans and to bring some stability. But this is not a policy. I mean, no country has ever progressed by banning the dog and cat foods. We have to, the problem is not saving dollars. That is an ad hoc solution. The problem is earning dollars. We are not earning dollars, actually. And there is no solution to this chronic problem until unless we earn sort of dollars. You cannot save too much dollars. So coming back to your question, actually, the kind of the export basket of Pakistan has remained unchanged over we did an analysis that over the 1980 to 2018, there is a very minor change in the export basket of Pakistan. And one reason is that we have been having the policies which counterproductive to export diversification, like overvaluation of rupee. But also protectionism. That we have been sort of protecting the industry, not letting it to the open market competition. There is always a sort of trade-off that maybe you have some costs in the immediate run, but then sort of you learn. For example, there is a problem that FDI does not come to Pakistan, as you have been talking also about the capital inflows and outflows. Right. FDI comes to the countries which have a very good export base, which have sort of competitiveness. To closed economies, to economies with very high protections, with very high tariffs, generally they discourage FDI inflow. Right. Because your tariffs are
very quickly. Because you just mentioned overvaluation of rupee, and that might have been a bottleneck. At this moment, dollar stands at 200 rupees. So that must be somewhere. I mean, I hope that now it is not overvalued. Let me ask you a very subjective question. So, very subjective question. I want to ask you, what exactly is the true value of rupee in your mind?
Let me be very honest. I don't have really, because the way political uncertainty is there, the way there is the panic in the market, changing sentiments, it's very difficult to determine, because you can have a value based on economic fundamentals, but the way political uncertainty is catalyzing it, it's very difficult, number one. But I'll just give you a quick response on, there is a myth and sort of the fallacy that depreciation does not help Pakistan. The way there is the argument now that if there is a dollar at 200, why is not helping? I ask a question actually, that Pakistan has never ever had a planned depreciation. It is always involuntary and forced depreciation that we do have. In Pakistan, it was 2015, 16, 17 and 18 when we should have let rupee adjusted. But it adjusted rupee forcefully when we were running out of the reserves. So and immediately we started increasing interest rate and energy prices under IMF program. So you cannot have any gains when there is a counterproductive policy simultaneously going on, because you don't let rupee adjust.
Right, Mr. Sajjan, sorry to interrupt, but we're almost out of time. So I'll just take a quick question from Mr. Mehtab before concluding the show. Mr. Mehtab, what do you see in terms of government decisions in the near future? What direction is the government going to take? Because, of course, the political instability is also affecting the economic situation of the country. So where do you see us going?
And which government?
Sir, actually the problem is that without reviving the IMF program, there is no alternate or immediate solution available to the government, because all other multilaterals and bilateral creditors and friends, everyone is watching towards IMF. And Pakistan and IMF are holding talks in Doha just right now. Absolutely. And it will be concluded by next week. So the government will have to withdraw the subsidies. The government will have to increase the petroleum prices in gradual and staggered manner. The government will have to increase the electricity prices as well. And there is also expectations that a monetary policy will be announced after 3-4 days on 23rd of May. So there is a possibility that they may also hike the discount rate as well.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Mehtab.
Right. Mehtab sir, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mehtab and Dr. Sajid Amin for joining us. If you have
quickly say
4 words, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, but regarding what is going on in the country, regarding economy, uncertainty never suits the economy, and our media, for heaven's sake, should have mercy on Pakistan's economy and stop speculating about the future of government, that this government is coming or that government is coming. That is horrible. Please have mercy.
That's all we have from the debate. We'll see you tomorrow.